I see more and more of our attendees logging on right now. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So let me just first off introduce myself. My name is Michelle Luevno. I'm the project director for the Minority Women's Enterprise Diversity Center, which is operated by the El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to go ahead and before we get to some housekeeping, turn it over to Ms. Sylvia Firth to do a welcome for the El Paso Bar Association. So Sylvia, if you want to go ahead and say a few words.
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for joining us in this venture. I think this is the first time we've ever done a joint broadcast with the Hispanic Chamber, and I hope it's not the last. Our president, Dan Hernandez, had reached out and asked for topics for, we continue to try to educate our membership during this, the pandemic. And I had the idea about information with regard to PPP. So you know how it is when you have a good idea, then you're tasked with making it happen. So I cheated a little. I reached out to I'm a member of the Hispanic Chamber, and I reached out to Terry Reed and Cindy Ramos Davidson, and they very quickly put this together for us. And so I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I know a lot of the lawyers that are on the line receive some of these loans, but more of us are even receiving questions from the small businesses in the community that received them about how to properly document and preserve the forgivability feature of the loan. So we're really looking forward to what Manny has to say. And with that, I'll turn it over back to Michelle.
All right, well, I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us. I also want to thank Manny for taking some time out of his day to join us. He's done a webinar for us before, so our members should be familiar with you. But before we get started, I do want to go over some housekeeping. First of all, if you are tuning in with us on Zoom, there are a couple of ways to ask questions. First of all is, of course, the question and answer panel, where you can provide written questions throughout the presentation. And we will get to those questions, of course, at the end of the presentation. There's going to be a lot of information that we are covering right now. So we want to go ahead and make sure to save those questions for the end. The other option is to also raise your hand, and we will get to your questions live on the air as well. The other option that you have if you're tuning in via any of the Facebook live streams is to submit a question via the comments section. And our communications director, Patrick Espinosa, is standing by to go ahead and send those over to us so we can ask those live on the air and get you all the answers that you need. I know that we also have had some people submitting some questions via email ahead of time, so we will be answering those questions as well at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Manny. Manny, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for doing another webinar for our community. We really appreciate it. Manny is the president and CEO of CFO Services Group, and you are, like I said, PhD level knowledge of PPP loans.
All right. That's sad, but probably true at this point. So I'm happy to be here. And as I said, I may be located, well, I live in Washington, DC, so I am here, but my heart is always in El Paso. My in-laws actually live in El Paso. So we try to get there at least once, if not twice a year, and get my fill of Chico's tacos before we leave. So, you know, very excited about that. So with that, let me go ahead and pop open my screen here. So everyone can hear me and everyone good? Okay, all right. So if you can't, just unmute yourself and yell at me. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about how to make sure your SBA loan is forgiven. That's that PPP loan, okay? So what I'm gonna do is do a little bit of, sorry, hang on one second. Where'd my notes go? My notes disappeared on me. Okay, I'm gonna do a little bit of intro. I'm gonna get to the content, which is why we're all here. And then at the end, I'll do open Q&A. So as Michelle said, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box or the Q&A box. Because there's so much content, I don't want to stop and take questions in the middle. Let me just kind of get through everything, and then we'll circle back. And I promise we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. I'll stick around as long as I have to. And if you do have more questions, I can't get to it, then you can always just meet with me one-on-one. That's fine. All right. So let's just to recap, here are the sources of all the funding that's available to you right now. And this is basically the agenda we're going to follow. So we're going to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program, of course, that's the really big one. The SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which is still out there. the Main Street Lending Program, which is sort of the new kid on the block, if you will, the Employee Retention Program, the Federal Sick and Family Leave, Payroll Tax Deferral. We'll quickly talk about some other funding that's available to you right now. And then we'll really briefly touch on some management, some key management things that you need to keep in mind as you're managing your finances through all of this, okay? But I definitely wanted to harp on these other ones just to make sure that you didn't forget these other things that could exist and how to make sure you really take advantage of them as well. The PPP is not the only thing out there. Okay, so the good news is hopefully by now you have applied for the PPP and maybe some of these other programs and you received the money. And so I know probably most of you are attorneys on here, so you probably were able to keep your business moving forward during this time. But if you're not an attorney, or if you're working with other businesses, let's say like your clients, like restaurants and whatnot, they may not have been able to keep their doors open. So hopefully they have received some assistance now and they're able to reopen their doors and at least start to kind of get their business back up and running again. So that's the good news, is that the money has come. The bad news is that you're not done yet by any stretch of the imagination. And I really want to emphasize that. There is a whole process still that you're going to have to go through. And that's what we're going to talk about here. So this webinar, I am going to briefly talk about the purpose of each of the programs I mentioned and give a really, really brief overview just as a reminder as to what they are, but I'm not going to go into any level of detail on them. So if you are still wondering about what is the PPP and how do I apply for it and what are these tax credits, there are other webinars. We've done other webinars on them, so you can always go to our website or just check out any other webinar and get the details on that. I'm really focusing this one on next steps, okay? And believe me, there's a lot of next steps. So we're gonna talk about how to account for the funds, how to maximize the forgiveness of that PPP, how to claim all those tax credits that you're eligible for, so do not forget those, okay? How to comfortably repay any loan that you get, whether the PPP isn't forgiven and it does turn into an actual loan, or the SBA disaster loan, or any other loan that you get, okay? And then ultimately, how to use your money and resources wisely during this period of time so that you really maximize the utility you get out of these loans, okay? So a little bit about me. My name is Manny Cosme. I'm the founder and CEO of CFO Services Group. We are an accounting firm that's focused on bookkeeping and strategy for small businesses and small nonprofits. We do have clients all over the country, including in El Paso area. And I'm also a serial entrepreneur. So the nice thing is that not only am I familiar with all these rules, but I am also living through it with everyone there, because we also applied for a PPP. We got our PPP. So I'm literally doing everything that I'm going to be mentioning myself on here. So believe me, I'm intimately familiar with all of these processes. All right. So in fact, I like to say I actually built this presentation really for me first to figure out what I needed to do so then I could tell everyone else. So, so with that, a couple of quick disclaimers. I am keeping this more high level. Keeping this also more focused on micro businesses, so under 100 employees, under 5 million revenue. If you have more than 100 employees, some of the rules could be a little bit differently. So just keep that in mind and feel free to ask about that. And then disclaimer B, and I really, really mean this, information is changing frequently. I kid you not, but I think probably yesterday we got some further updated guidance on stuff. So there's still information that's coming out there. You know, these programs, in my opinion, were put together very fast and kind of sloppy, to be honest. So there's a lot of questions, a lot of gray area out there. What I'm going to do is share the latest and greatest information that we have, but please keep in mind that you may have questions that we do not have answers to yet, okay? Or things that are still kind of ambiguous that, you know, I think this is going to be the answer, but no, we actually haven't heard an official guidance on this, okay? So I'll do my best to kind of mention those things as I'm talking so you know where those gray areas are, particularly if you are an attorney and clients are asking you these questions. These are the things you're going to want to pay attention to see if guidance changes over the next few days or weeks here, okay? So with that, let's jump into the material. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the Paycheck Protection Program. Of course, this is the big one that everyone is fixated on. So what is the Paycheck Protection Program? Just real quick, the purpose of it was to basically keep employees working and producing during this period of time. What the government didn't want was a bunch of people stop working and then start collecting unemployment and not being productive, because then our economy would come to a grinding halt. So to try to avoid that, which, you know, we can debate whether they accomplished that goal or not, but, you know, they decided, well, instead of people applying for unemployment, what we're going to do is we're going to give money to businesses so that they can keep their employees employed and producing revenue during this time, so that the economic impact is lessened, basically. Okay, so that was the whole point of the Paycheck Protection Program, is to keep employees working and producing. Now, it's very important to keep that in mind, because when we talk about the forgiveness, it all makes sense why the criteria is in place that they put to get you the forgiveness. It's because it's really to serve this end purpose, okay? So let's talk about the criteria. So there's basically three major things that you have to be concerned with, okay? And they center around the time period, the authorized spending that's allowed, and then the employee count, okay? So what we're gonna do is dive into each one of these three criteria here and talk about them. So the very first criteria, which is the easiest one to talk about, is the time period. So when you get paid, when you get the PPP, you have 8 weeks in which to spend that money, okay? So from the day that you get your first disbursement of funds, a clock starts ticking. And from that day, you have 8 weeks or 56 days to do everything with, okay? Once that 8 weeks ends, the PPP ends for you, okay? So some important things to know is that the clock does start ticking the moment those funds hit your bank account, okay? So you want to be checking your account frequently. If you know that you got approved for the funds, or if your client got approved for the funds, you want to make sure that you're checking your bank account every day from that point to see when those funds actually hit, and then start your clock ticking from there, okay? Then during that 8-week period of time, you need to have the correct authorized spending, and you need to keep an employee count, which I'll talk about, okay? So the key there is just make sure you know when that money hits your account and mark your calendar, okay? So criteria number 2 is around spending. So this is kind of the complicated one, all right? So during the 8-week period of time, there are only certain things that you can spend the money on, and it centers around payroll and then these sort of other authorized spending, okay? Other authorized things that you can spend the money on. So let's talk about this first one, which is payroll spending, okay? So during this 8-week period of time, you can only spend the money on the following things as it relates to payroll: gross wages, owner compensation, which I'll get to in a second, severance payments, paid time off, okay, which is not federal paid time off, but just normal paid time off that you give to your employees, state and local taxes, and employer paid health benefits and employer paid retirement benefits, okay? And by the way, gross wages, you can only covers someone who's making an annualized salary of $100,000 or less, okay? Which basically means $8,333 per employee per month, right? Because that times 12 is $100,000, okay? So you can only spend the money on that payroll spending. What does not count is the federal employer taxes that you pay, so your FICA and FUTA taxes, and any federal sick and family leave that's paid to the employees, because remember, that comes from the government. And I'm going to talk more about the federal sick and family leave later in the presentation, okay? So when you spend the money for the payroll portion, those are the expenses that you can count against that money that you received, okay? Now, owner's compensation, there's been a lot of questions around what exactly does that entail. So if I'm the owner of a business, and let's say that I'm an LLC, right? And or just a sole proprietorship, and I get paid, maybe I don't get paid through payroll. Maybe I just take, I really, the income of the business, the profit is really my income, right? Because I get taxed on that. Okay, so for you, the owner, this is how we calculate your payment. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your 2019 net profit, which would show up on your tax return. Okay. Typically it'd be line Schedule C, line 31, let's say, for example. Okay. You're going to take that profit. You're going to divide it by 12. That's going to give you your average monthly profit for last year. That times 2 is the amount that you can claim as your owner compensation. So that amount basically is automatically forgiven, if you want to think about it that way. 2 months of your average profit is going to be automatically forgiven as your payment as an owner, okay? Then the rest has to go to pay payroll and other expenses. So that's how you calculate the owner compensation, all right? Now, other spending, so payroll's one thing, then you can spend the money on these other authorized expenditures. This includes mortgage interest, okay? So the interest you pay, interest portion only of any mortgages that you pay, not the principal, but the interest. Any office rent you pay, any utilities, which is telephone, gas, water, telephone, electricity, gas, water, internet. Transportation, which basically includes gasoline. Now, it does not include commute benefits, okay? So if you do have employees that are commuting, that's actually, the commute benefit is considered a payroll expense, and it is not an authorized payroll expense, okay? It's kind of weird there. But transportation is mostly like if you are, let's say, in the trucking industry and you're paying gasoline, maybe something like that, okay? That's transportation. Now, and interest on debt due before February 15th. So this is, I'm going to pause right here because this is an example of some of the ambiguity. So transportation and this interest on debt still haven't really been clearly defined what really exactly this means down to detail. So transportation, again, we speculate it means things like gasoline and whatnot, but actually no official Treasury announcement has been, or regulation has been put forth to say what exactly transportation means. So we're still kind of waiting to hear what exactly you mean by this. Same thing with interest on debt. There's been a lot of talk saying that really what they mean is interest on personal property or real property debt. So not things like your credit card, not things like any loan you had out there or a line of credit. This would actually only be interest on things like your mortgage, or if you bought a piece of equipment, things like that, okay? Which I think is what they're intending, but again, no official word has been given on that. So those are the kind of little gray areas that you want to pay attention to right now, just to see if a client, or if you have that question, to see if that changes over the next few days or weeks, okay? So those are the only authorized expenditures. Everything else is not authorized. The big one here includes 1099 contractors. You cannot use the PPP funds to pay a 1099 contractor, okay? You also can't use them to pay, you can't use it to pay raw materials, any software, website, kind of attorneys, unfortunately, accountants, you can't use it to pay any of those expenses, okay? Insurance, things like that, okay? You can only use it for those authorized expenses, all right? Now, the other thing to keep in mind around the expenditures is not only can you spend it on payroll and these other authorized things, but you have to meet certain percentage requirements. So 75%, at least 75% to 100% of the PPP funds that you get, you have to spend that on those payroll items, okay? You can only spend up to 25% on the other authorized expenditures. Now that means you can spend 100% on payroll, that's okay, but at least 75% of it has to be spent on payroll. Only up to 25% can be spent on these other things here, okay? So you definitely need to double check and make sure that you are not only spending the money on the right things, the authorized things, but also that you're spending them in the right ratio, okay? So that becomes some bookkeeping work that you need to do and you need to keep on top of. All right. So that's criteria 2 around the spending. Criteria 2 is all around your employee count. So remember, the whole point of the PPP was to keep people employed. So what they don't want is people not working. Because of that, you are required to keep a certain employee count. Okay. You have to make sure that your employee headcount has not been reduced from last year. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at last year's, your average full-time equivalent, basically, when you calculated the PPP, when you submitted for that, you had to indicate a certain payroll dollar figure, okay? That was tied to a certain number of full-time equivalents that you had. You have to keep that same head count during this period of time, okay? That's the point. You also have to make sure that your total payroll expenditure does not decrease by more than 25% of what you were paying during that period of time. So, quick example, let's say that your average payroll last year that you calculated the PPP from, let's say that average payroll was $10,000 a month. You have to be spending at least $7,500 a month now during the PPP in order for it to be forgiven. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. That can get a little tricky, so keep that in mind. Okay, now, however, if you did lay off people, you do have until June 30th to be able to rehire people to get back to that full-time equivalent, because the government recognizes that it may take a minute for you to rehire. So they're giving you a little bit of a grace period there, but you do have to get everyone back on board by June 30th. All right. So quick example, let's say that April 1st, you laid off 2 full-time employees and you reduced wages by everyone by 50% because you didn't know what was going to happen. So on May 1st, you applied for it and you received your PPP fund. So you finally got the money in the bank account May 1st. You now have 8 weeks with which to spend this money, okay? So by June 26th, let's say, you were able to rehire your 2 full-time employees and you brought everyone's wages back to 100%. So therefore, because you cured that deficiency on July 1st, now you can apply for the full forgiveness, okay, if you met all the other criteria. So that's basically how it's going to work there. Now, I will caution you that this is where you have to really think about spending that money percentage-wise, because if you wait too long to rehire employees, will you be able to spend at least 75% of this money on payroll before the time runs out? Because if let's say I had 10 employees, let's go to the extreme. Let's say I have 10 employees that I had on payroll, right? And when I get my money, I only have 1 person left. Well, there's a wage cap. So am I really in 8 weeks going to be able to spend all the PPP money on this 1 person? Probably not, right? So I'm not going to be able to meet that 75% payroll criteria. So you really have to think about that and make sure that you're really, really, really clear on all these criteria and how you're going to meet all of them, okay? Because if you miss one of them, you're going to have an amount that's not going to be forgiven. Not the end of the world, but you may have to pay back some of it, okay? So you have to be really, really clear about that. All right, so one other thing to keep in mind is that the forgiveness is not automatic, okay? You're not gonna automatically get forgiven for the money once the period ends. Once that 8 weeks ends, you have 90 days with which to ask for the forgiveness, which basically means you're gonna go back to your lender that you got the money from and say, okay, my 8 weeks is over. Here's what I spent the money on. I want to get officially forgiven for this loan. And then they're going to give you whatever process they're going to go through. Now, every lender is going to have their own process. So they're going to ask you for whatever documents they want, they need to justify this. So just be prepared with that paperwork, because you only have 90 days to ask for that forgiveness. And if you miss that window, you're going to end up having to pay it back. Okay, so be prepared for that, and literally, the next day, maybe after the 8 weeks end, start the process of applying for the forgiveness, okay? But don't forget that. And by the way, we've gotten this question a lot. If the funds get forgiven, is that going to be considered taxable income to me? The answer is no. You're not going to get taxed on that, so that's good. However, the money you spent, the expenses that you spent the money on is also not going to be considered a deduction for tax purposes. So it kind of washes out. So in other words, it really has no impact on your taxes, which is good. So, you basically get 2 months of payroll for free, I guess, if you want to think about it that way. So that's good. All right. So what happens if you don't meet the criteria? So let's say that you missed something and now you're going to have to pay some of it back. So here are basically the 5 ways in which you can miss the criteria and end up having to pay some of it back. So 1, you didn't spend all the funds in 8 weeks. Remember, you are supposed to spend every dime of that money within the 8 weeks that you get it. If you don't spend some of it by the end of the 8 weeks, it does not count, and you're going to have to pay that back. Okay. So again, not only do you want to make sure you know what you're spending your money on, you want to make sure that you're spending all of it. Okay. Number two is if you spent the money on unauthorized expenses. So again, we go back to that list. If I use some of this money on something that was unauthorized, you are going to have to pay that portion of it back. Okay. If you didn't spend according to that 75%, 25% ratio, if you missed that, then you're going to have to repay some of that money back. Okay. If you didn't rehire everyone by June 30th, or if you didn't restore the wages by June 30th, then you are going to have to pay a portion of that back. And there are some calculators that you can use to figure out what that prorated amount will be. Okay. So if you do not get a portion of this forgiven, then you are going to have to repay it. And this is what it's going to look like. You're going to pay, it's going to carry an interest rate of 1%, so very low interest rate, but 1%, and you're going to have 2 years to pay that back. The good news is that there's no prepayment fees. So if you miss one of the criteria and you do end up with a little bit left over as a loan, you can go ahead and just pay that right back, and it's as if it never happened. So you may want to think about that, or just hold on to it as a low interest rate loan. Okay, but your first payment will be deferred by a few months there, so you don't have to start paying it back right away. All right. So the key thing here, I cannot stress this enough, is to keep really, really, really good bookkeeping records on all of this. Okay, because there are so many little criteria and so many, you can spend money on this, but not this, and blah, 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 that you really need to keep a really strong handle on what you're spending the money on, okay? And make sure you hit all this criteria. So some quick bookkeeping tips. These are kind of two ways we're recommending we do it. So either one or the other, it doesn't really matter which one you do. But the first and easiest way is to think about it is to use a separate PPP bank account. So for those of you who are attorneys, if you have client retainers, you trust accounting, things like that, think of this as almost another trust account. So what you want to do is maybe park this money into that PPP trust account, if you will. Okay. And then as you spend authorized expenditures from the PPP money, you can just transfer this money right into your main operating account. So that's a kind of quick and easy way to account for the funds, and also to see what balances you have left in that account so that you can make sure you're spending it all. Okay. The detriment of that, if you will, is that you may have to open up another bank account, and you'll see that there's a couple of other things you may want to track, and you don't want to end up with too many bank accounts to track all of these things. So that can be a lot of transfers back and forth and whatnot as well. But that's one method. The other method is to use QuickBooks. So what you can do is set up a class tracking feature in QuickBooks, or even just on paper, create another account in your chart of accounts that houses the PPP money. And then on paper, you're just going to kind of transfer the money back and forth. The good news is you don't have to transfer physical money back and forth, which can be a lot of work. You can just do it on paper, which is really nice. And because there are some other things you may want to track because of some of the other programs you're getting, then it will be a little easier to do it within QuickBooks to account for everything, not just that little PPP portion. Okay, but no matter which method you do, I would highly recommend that you have a bookkeeper help you set up, track, and transfer these funds. Again, because there's so many little things in there, you don't want to miss something and then end up risking having to pay back some of it or not being forgiven. Okay, so that's how you do the bookkeeping around this. So that's it for the PPP. I'm sure there are going to be a ton of questions, so I will take those at the end because I know that was really fast, but that's the general gist of how we're going to do the PPP forgiveness. So let's move on to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. This is the SBA's EIDL. This one is a full-on loan. So if you did get this money, then this is going to be a loan that you will have to repay. And as a reminder, the interest rate is set. It's 3.75% for businesses or 2.75% for nonprofits. You are going to have 30 years to repay that loan. And your first payment is not going to be until July of 2021. Okay, so you have some time there to kind of like get all that in order. Okay. Now, if you got the advance on the SBA loan, which many of you may have gotten. The idea, you're supposed to get $1,000 advance per employee if you applied for this advance, okay? Now, the idea was that you were supposed to get this money before you got the PPP money. Well, turns out that didn't really happen that way. A lot of people got the PPP money and then they got the SBA advance on top of that. Not quite how that was supposed to work. They were supposed to take out of the PPP money, they're supposed to subtract the advance that you got. But here we are. So you may actually have gotten a little bit more money than you anticipated. Great. At this point, what I'm telling you is just treat that money like you are the rest of the PPP. Put that money right into that PPP fund. If you created a second bank account or in your chart of accounts, whatever, just put that money into that account and just treat it as just more PPP money, okay? And just follow the rules that you would with the PPP to make sure that that gets included as the total forgiveness. That's the way that we're treating it right now until we hear otherwise from the SBA. Now, really clear, if you got the EIDL though on top of the PPP, so if you got this one as a separate loan, you do want to be very clear on what you're spending your money on, because remember, the PPP has very specific requirements that you can spend the money on. Okay, the EIDL, the SBA EIDL, you can spend money on a lot of other things. So again, this is where you want to keep really clear bookkeeping records to make sure that you know exactly what you're spending the money on. What bucket of money am I spending here? Okay, so again, use QuickBooks or set up yet another separate bank account to house the SBA's EIDL loan funds. And then again, as you spend that money, make sure you know which account you're drawing it from so that you don't end up confusing yourself and making a mistake on any of the paperwork on the back end, okay? So again, that's a really great place for a bookkeeper to help you just track all of these funds, okay? So let's quickly, very briefly talk about the Main Street Lending Program, which you may or may not be familiar with. This is sort of the new kid on the block, okay? It actually was part of the CARES Act. It just wasn't really talked about much until recently because the PPP sort of took over all the news. All right, but the purpose of the Main Street Lending Program was to provide additional lending to small or medium-sized businesses who were financially healthy before the pandemic started. What that means, financially healthy means, is that if you're a business that had a strong profit and did not carry any debt, then you are eligible to take a Main Street Lending Program. You can take the PPP and the Main Street Lending Program. So this is an and, it's not an or, it's and the Main Street Lending Program, okay? So what this means is that if the minimum loan amount that you can apply for is $500,000, $500,000. You can't apply for anything less than that. So again, you have to have been a financially healthy business to be able to get a loan of that size or more. The way they're calculating it is it's going to be multiple. It's going to be 4 times your EBITDA, or basically your net profit, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, which is basically your net profit, okay? So you get 4 times your net profit. That's how they determine the loan. So if the minimum loan is $500,000, then the minimum profit you can have is $125,000, right? Because 125 times 4 is 500,000, okay? So you have to have at least a minimum of that, carrying no debt, okay? If you are carrying debt, those requirements change a little bit, all right? Now, the interest rate you're gonna pay is gonna be fixed, and it's actually based on the London interest rates, the LIBOR, okay? That's basically the interest rate they use in London to determine bank rates, basically, okay? So it's the LIBOR plus 3% is the rate that you're gonna be assessed for this loan, and you're gonna have 4 years to pay that back. So if you qualify for this loan, then you definitely want to talk to your bank to see if you can apply and get some additional money here at a pretty low interest rate. I mean, it's a pretty good deal, okay? So definitely check that out if you qualify for that. So let's talk about the employee retention rate credit here. As a reminder, this was something else that was available to businesses. If you did not get the PPP, then you would have been eligible to take the employee retention credit. And what this was going to do was this was going to help businesses pay for some of their payroll costs. The federal government was going to basically pay you 50% of your employees' costs, up to $5,000 per employee. And that was going to come through as a tax credit. So this is really important because some businesses were not eligible for the PPP, particularly if you are a 501c6 organization, which is a chamber of commerce or an industry association, you were not eligible to take the PPP. So the employee retention credit is the one you really want to look at, okay? So El Paso Hispanic Chamber, I'm hoping that you took the employee retention credit here. You're going to take advantage of this, all right? So again, the criteria was that you could not take a Paycheck Protection Program loan, and you had to show that your business was closed due to government regulation, or you lost a significant amount of revenue. Now, closed business means basically, like for chambers, if you weren't able to do in-person events, things like that, they're considering that your business closed basically. So I'm not going to go into all the criteria there, but you can check that out if you really want to see what that criteria is, okay? So if you were able to take the credit, this is what you would do, okay? You would, and I'm going to show you examples of this. You would call your payroll provider and tell them to apply the credit. Your payroll report will show a 0. Your employer's Social Security tax will show a 0. Then your payroll tax return will show an overpayment, and then you go to refund of the payment. So let me show you what this actually looks like. And I'm taking the time to show this because on the next few credits, it's going to kind of be the same process. So if you're going to take the employee retention credit, what you want to do is you're going to tell your payroll provider. Then when they send you a payroll report, you're going to want to double check your payroll report to make sure that it looks like this. So in the employer taxes section, you're going to see that the Social Security tax that you're assessed as an employer should now show 0, okay? If it's showing 0, that means that you are taking advantage of the credit. Now you'll notice that on the employee side, they still get assessed the Social Security tax because they still have to pay it. But you as the employer are going to get assessed 0, okay? That's how you know that you're taking advantage of this. Then on your 941, which is your quarterly payroll tax return at the end of the quarter, you're now going to show a credit there equal to the amount of the credit that you can apply for. So this is just an example of what we think the 941 is going to look like. It's actually not out yet, but I think it's going to, somewhere in the 941, they're probably going to have a line now that says, you know, tax credits due to COVID relief or something like that. And then you're going to see a negative amount there. That's the credit that's going to be applied to your taxes. What that's going to do now is then at the very bottom, it's going to show that you overpaid your taxes. So you're going to see a negative amount, meaning that you overpaid your payroll taxes. That's going to trigger a refund to you to get that money back in your bank account. So that's basically how that's going to work, okay? So these are the things that you want to check if you're taking advantage of to make sure that this is being done properly, okay? Now, the good news is that you don't have to wait until the end of the quarter to get that money back. You can actually file a new form with the IRS, Form 7200, to expedite that refund. So you're going to file this form 7200, and then the IRS is basically going to fast track that money back to you so you get it right away, so you don't have to wait until the end of the quarter to get that. So keep all that in mind if you're applying for the employee retention credit. All right, the next one is the federal sick and family leave. Now, again, as a reminder, the federal government, as part of the coronavirus relief efforts, recognized that people were going to get sick or people are going to have to take family leave during this time. So they didn't want small businesses having to bear the burden of this. So the federal government is basically paying for your sick leave, for your employees' sick leave during this time, okay? Sick leave and family leave. So every employee, which includes business owners, by the way. So if you don't have employees, you're an owner of a business, you can take sick leave as well. You can take advantage of this. You get 2 weeks or 80 hours of paid sick leave at 100% of your normal salary, up to $511 per day, okay? And for family leave, you get 10 weeks or 400 hours of paid family leave at 2/3 of your normal pay, up to $200 per day. So I'm not going to go into the full details of all that. If you want to check that out, definitely watch one of my other webinars where I go into a lot of detail around family sick and federal sick and family leave. But I will tell you that this is what it means, okay? So just as a reminder, sick leave means anyone told to quarantine, showing symptoms, exposed to the virus, or trying to get a test or preventative care. Family leaves means, of course, you're taking care of someone who's sick, Or if your child's school has shut down and now you have to homeschool, let's say, and you can't work as a result, you can take advantage of family leave. So this is going to be applicable for a lot of people, and it's really good that we were able to take advantage of this. Okay, and again, as an owner of a business, you can take advantage of this. All right, so this is how it works. Okay, if someone needs to take sick leave or family leave, you as the business, you're going to keep paying the employee during that time. So for sick leave, you're going to pay them 100% of their normal pay as normal, just give them their normal paycheck. For family leave, you're going to give them 2/3 of their pay as a paycheck, okay? And then you're going to apply for reimbursement via payroll tax credits. So again, this is an area where you want to ask your payroll provider to help you do this if someone needs to take advantage of this. So in our system, Gusto, which is the one that we use in-house for our clients, there actually is a box now that pops up and asks you this question. So you will see this if you run your own payroll and you happen to use Gusto or ADP or any of the other, related systems, you should see something similar to this now, where when we run someone's payroll, it actually is literally asking us now, hey, you're paying this person. Did they happen to use any of this federal or, federal sick or family leave? And then in these boxes here, we can actually say, yes, they use sick leave, this is why, and this is how many hours they use. And the payroll system now will start tracking all this for you. So hopefully, if you're doing your own payroll, you see this in there, or if you have a payroll provider, they'll be asking you this question. And definitely, if they don't ask you, bring it up to them, okay? So that's how you're going to actually apply for this stuff. Again, you're going to want to double check your payroll reports just to make sure. And now, again, on employer taxes, you're going to see 0 for the Social Security tax, but you're also going to see over in the earnings section, you're going to see federal sick leave or family leave now show up as a line item. You want to make sure that you see this stuff. Take a minute to double check this just to make sure that your payroll system is up and running properly. Okay, this stuff is very new. Things are happening really fast. So don't just assume that the computer system is catching this stuff. You want to make sure that you're actually getting these tax credits. Okay, so you're going to see the sick leave show up, or the family leave, and the Social Security tax 0. That's how you know that it's working. Okay, then again, on your 941, you're going to see a negative amount in there for the rest of it that you can take, and then you're going to see you're going to get the trigger of the overpayment. Okay, so again, double check that, make sure that's all looking good, and then of course you can file Form 7200 to get the expedited refund of that. So that's how it works if you have employees and a payroll system. So what happens if you don't have employees or you don't have a payroll system? Okay, so as you can still take advantage of this as the owner of a business. So for here, what you're going to do is you're going to apply for this stuff as a tax credit on your Form 1040. So your personal income tax return, this is where probably on your Schedule C, that's where you're going to apply for your tax credit. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're tracking all this so that when you file your tax return, I guess in 2021 now, you're tracking all this. Okay, and you can apply for this there. But again, you can file Form 7200 if you want to expedite that payment, because you may not want to wait until April 15th of 2021 to get this money back. So file Form 7200 to get all this money back, okay? So the key here is that you really want to track the hours that people are spending here, because they only get 2 weeks of sick and 10 weeks of family leave. Okay, so you as the owner of the business, you want to make sure that you are on top of who's using this and when they've exhausted this to let them know. Okay, so because anything outside of this, you're going to have to pay out of your own pocket. So take advantage of, make sure that you're tracking this and you don't end up giving someone too much leave. Okay, again, same thing. If you're the owner of the business and you have to put it on your 1040, you have to track these hours so you can apply for that on your tax return. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on all these tax credits. So make sure you have a payroll system or a bookkeeper who's tracking this stuff for you. Very important. All right. So the next one is the payroll tax deferral. And as a reminder, that part of the CARES Act said that if you have employees and you pay a social security tax on your employees' wages, you can delay some of this payment. So you don't have to pay it right away over to the government. You can hold on to this money to get some additional cash in your bank, keep additional cash in your bank, okay? You can delay all these payments through the end of the year. And then whatever that balance is at the end of the year, 50% of it can be paid by December 31st of 2021 and the rest by 2022, okay? So to take advantage of that, which I highly recommend you do, in your payroll system, again, hopefully it's gonna ask you if you want to do this. So in our payroll system, Gusto, a box pops up, asks us, hey, do you wanna turn on the Social Security tax deferral? And all we have to do is push the button and say yes. And then boom, there we are. It's going to start deferring that payroll tax amount for that Social Security tax amount for us. So we don't have to pay that. Again, you want to double check your tax return, your payroll reports to make sure that this is happening. This is going to be a little bit different. You're going to check that Social Security and the employer taxes. This time around, however, it's not going to show zero. Okay. If it shows zero, it's actually wrong. You're going to show an amount. Okay, because you're still assessed the Social Security tax, you're just not going to pay it. What is going to change is that the total amount of the payroll, normally that gets pulled out of your bank account. Now it's going to be less that Social Security amount. So in this example, it's $11,630. Normally is pulled out of the bank account. It's going to be that less the $619. So that amount is actually going to be pulled out of the bank account. So that's what you want to double check to make sure this is working properly, okay? Now, it's going to start accumulating a balance there. As payrolls roll by, you're going to start building up a balance. You really want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on that balance so it doesn't get out of control, okay? Because you're going to have to pay it back. So you, in your bookkeeping records, you need to create a liability so you start tracking this so you know exactly how much you owe, okay? So again, have your bookkeeper help you set that up. And if you use a payroll system that syncs with QuickBooks, you're gonna wanna set up that sync so it does all of this automatically for you. But you as the owner, you really wanna make sure you're watching that balance because remember, you have to pay this balance back, 50% of it by 2021, and the other half by 2022, okay? And if you miss those payments, you will get penalized. So make sure that you're watching this stuff, okay? Now, once you get the PPP forgiven, you have to turn off the deferral. This is very, very important, okay? When you get the PPP forgiven, you have to turn off the deferral. You have to stop it, okay? So it's not when the PPP money is received. It's not when your PPP period is done. Only when the PPP is officially forgiven by your bank do you have to do this, but you do actually have to turn it off, okay? And so again, hopefully in your payroll system, you're gonna see an option to turn off the deferral so it stops doing that, okay? And then everything goes back to normal. All right, so that's the payroll tax deferral. So real quick, two other sections and then I'll take questions. Real quick on other funding, I just wanted to remind everyone that all these federal programs and tax programs is not the only thing out there. You may have access to other funding and other sources of relief for you right now. So this can come in the form of direct loans and grants, but can also come in the form of tax relief. So like I know here in DC, for example, we have the ability to defer sales tax payments right now. So again, we're able to keep a little bit more money in our bank accounts. Maybe tenant protections, so to stop evictions on commercial business, compliance deferment, like if you have to renew your business license, that's been deferred, kind of stuff like that. So you definitely want to check your state and county governments just to see if there's anything else out there for you. Okay, there's also some private programs that have been popping up recently. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, Facebook has a grant program, Goldman Sachs has a program. I encourage you to check any industry associations, maybe like the bar or something like that. You know, if there's maybe the bar on a national level may have some programs. So you want to just kind of check these other private organizations to see if there's some programs available for you to tap into. And then of course, if you need expansion capital, businesses are still expanding during this time, and it's a great time if you're able to expand to go get capital because the competition is much lower. So I would check a community development financial institution to see if there's funds available for you to expand. All right. The important thing there is to make sure you check the criteria of any program you apply for and get money through to make sure that you're abiding by all the rules. And of course, check with your accountant as well. And then finally, real quick on management, just please remember that these programs are a Band-Aid for you. They're only meant to keep you moving for 2 to 3 months maximum. You do need to grow your way out of the situation. And I would not want to leave here without really stressing this, okay? You have to really think about how to grow during this situation. And that goes to using this money wisely. You've been given a great gift here. Use it wisely to help catapult your business and grow out of the situation, okay? Use the money to create new revenue streams. We've been getting a lot of questions of, well, great, so I can pay my employees, but I don't know what they're going to do. My business is closed. Well, get them back on board and have them think about new creative ways to create new revenue streams in your business, okay? That's the whole point of this, was to put on that entrepreneurial hat and figure out how to make money in a situation like this, okay? Also, make sure you're updating your financial and cash forecast on a regular basis. As you get the money in the door, you want to keep a really strong pulse on how much cash do I have and what do I need to be spending my money on and what does my situation look like, okay? So update your financial forecast whenever you get cash. Whenever you have changes to your business, like you rehired your employees, make sure you update your financial forecast. Make sure you update if you create new sales streams or cut expenses. Keep a really, really, really strong pulse on the finances of your business right now. And also, of course, if you do take loans and you need to repay them, you really want to make sure that you're on top of what those payments are going to look like so you have enough cash and can make wise financial decisions with your business right now, okay? Very, very important. And really all this is around strategy, strategy, strategy. So make sure you're thinking about using this money strategically to, again, not only get you through this period of time, but hopefully grow your way during this period. All right. Now, I know that's a lot. So we are offering some free assistance. We are offering some free disaster planning sessions. So if you do want to strategize around some of those things, we are still offering loan assistance. So if someone hasn't gotten the PPP or anything else, we can still help with that. And we are offering some free bookkeeping support now to help you kind of keep track of all these pieces. So you can schedule some time there, cfoservicesgroup.com/COVID-19, and we are happy to help you out. And I know there's a lot of information really fast, so I will now open it up to questions. It's a lot, so.
All right, Manny, we'll give you a little bit of a chance to take your breath, go ahead and get a sip of water, because we've got about 37 questions in the queue already. But for those of you who are interested in asking questions, go ahead and submit your questions if you're tuning in with us via Zoom, via the question and answer panel. You can also raise your hand and ask your question live on the air. The other option, of course, if you're tuning in on any of our Facebook live streams, is to go ahead and submit your questions via the comment section of the Facebook live feed. And our communications director, Patrick Espinosa, is standing by to go ahead and take your questions and submit them to us. We do have one person who is particularly brave this afternoon. Ms. Delia Amaya would like to ask her question live on the air. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you right now, Delia, and go ahead and ask your question live. Let me make sure that you're unmuted first. All right, so I just need for you, Delia, to go ahead and unmute yourself as well, if you're still interested in asking your question live. Okay, I see Delia is still on mute, so while she unmutes herself, I'm going to go ahead and move into some of the questions that we have in the queue right now. Okay. So first off, Manny, we have the first question of, what if I got more funds than the current payroll? And this is a question that we've actually gotten quite a bit of. So what if, based on the SBA rules, I had more employees last year than I said, than I actually had right now. So when I was applying, can I hire new employees with said money?
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely hire more people. There's definitely no rule that says you can't hire more. You just can't have less than. That's the rule. So yeah, if you got more money, and that yes, we've also gotten that question. That's happened quite a bit. You know, I do wonder if The rules changed quite a bit as to how you calculated the PPP when it first came out. So that could be very well possible. So yeah, you can use it to hire new people, keep it as a low interest rate loan, right? Because you may not get the whole thing forgiven, but 1% interest is not so bad. So I would just keep it as a low interest rate loan, me personally. So yeah.
All right. So our next question up is under the PPP, is there any impediment to increasing wages or salary in an effort to spend down leftover funds as that 8-week deadline approaches? We've gotten this question a lot as well.
Yes, that is also a very common question. So the official ad that there is no, we have not been told you cannot not do that basically. So yeah, you can increase salaries. We've gotten the question around bonuses. Can I give people bonuses? Yeah, I mean, the SBA has not said that you can't do that. So yeah, every sign points to yes, you can do it. I mean, and I hate to say that because the accountant in me is like, well, I feel like that shouldn't be the answer, but everything we've read said, yeah. I mean, there's been no one says that you can't do it. So another question that I would kind of just keep a pulse on just to see if that changes over the next few days or weeks. But as of this point, you can give bonuses, you can increase salaries. Yeah, it's actually okay. You can't pay over that $100,000 cap per person. Just keep that in mind.
Right. So our next question is owner compensation part of the 75% threshold? And that's another question that we've gotten a few times in the queue right now.
Yes, that is part of, yeah, that's part of the 75%, yeah, spend. So that is payroll. That's considered payroll.
All right. We've got another interesting question coming in when it comes to independent contractors. So is there a way to provide relief from our own PPP loan that we've taken if our independent contractors didn't apply for the PPP loan themselves?
No, I mean, you can't use the PPP to pay independent contractors. That does not count as part of the spend. So no, I mean, that if you got the SBA disaster loan, you could use those funds to pay the contractors, but the PPP you cannot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question. How does the allocation of the 75% have to go? If we have a staff employee who had no lost wages, can we not give them a portion of the PPP loan and give that portion to another employee?
Well, I'm not sure the question. I mean, it's not like it's not like you're giving someone this money per se. It's just you're just keeping them on payroll and paying them. And then you're counting that against that balance that's sitting there for the PPP. So I'm not quite sure what that question is. Maybe that person can ask live if they need more clarification on that.
Yeah, so if you need more clarification and that was your question, make sure to either submit some clarification in the chat box or go ahead and ask your question live. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next question. Can we give a lump sum payment to the employee or do we have to pay them over an 8-week period?
I mean, you can exhaust the funds, I guess, if you want, like immediately. But the idea is like, I mean, I guess you could just pay someone out in one payroll. I guess that's fine. Yeah. Versus spreading it out over the 8 weeks, depending on your situation. I guess I could see where that would happen. Yeah. I mean, I don't see any reason why you couldn't.
And the next question you already answered in terms of being able to provide bonuses for employees that came in and maybe went that extra mile during this COVID-19. You could, as of right now, do that under the PPP program, but things are constantly changing and evolving. So make sure to kind of keep your pulse on that so you don't get yourself in trouble later on.
Yeah, actually, let me go back to the prior question, because I do want to make this one point though, because this is really important. You have to be careful, because we've gotten this question a lot too of, well, what if I didn't pay my employees for the past few weeks? I've been sort of holding off paying them, and then all of a sudden I got this money, and now I'm going to basically do catch-up payroll. Okay, That's been a question we've been getting a lot. Again, there's no official word from the SBA on this. However, as an accountant, I would caution you, if your records are audited and they see that you're doing that, because it's pretty obvious to an accountant what you're doing. I mean, we can catch that pretty fast. You may get in trouble. So you do want to kind of think about that as well, okay? I can see that being his question, because again, we've gotten that a few times. I say do that at your own risk, okay?
Okay. So you mentioned the word accounting and accountants, and we do have some questions coming in about the accounting side of this. So the first question that we have coming in is regarding the tax deduction. So let me go ahead and pull up this question here. So what happens to the amount that's forgiven under the PPP loan? Would it essentially become a taxable item on income, on the income return as other income?
Well, it's not going to be taxable. So I don't know where they're going to put it on the tax return, because I don't think they've gotten that far. Somewhere on there, it's now going to show, I'm sure it's probably going to have its own line item, the PPP loan forgiveness, but it's not going to be taxed. So normally, if you get a loan forgiven, it is considered income to you, and therefore it is taxable. In this particular instance, it will not be taxed. However, at the same time, the money that you spend the PPP on will, I guess, not be considered deductible. So it sort of ends up washing out anyway. So I don't really know what the point was of that. But the IRS definitely made it a point to mention that. So thank you for that, although it really has zero impact on anything. So I don't know.
And then like a follow-up question to that is, what about whatever portion is not forgiven? Like, where is that going to go in terms of the tax returns?
Well, that's just a loan that you, so it's not on your tax return. That's just a loan that you carry on your balance sheet now. So just like any other loan, like a normal loan doesn't show up on your tax return, right? It's just, I borrowed money from Joe and now I got to pay Joe back. Well, that's not taxable. That's nothing to do with taxes. So it's not going to show up on your tax return at all.
So some more questions coming in on Facebook about tax deductions. Do health insurance payments count as forgivable deductions for 1099s or single member LLCs that have received the PPP, or is it only for companies with W-2 employees that have employee-sponsored programs?
Yeah, great question. Great question. Another gray area, but we kind of are going with, and I mean, I think there's been a little more clarification around this. It's employer-sponsored. So what was said is that they meant employer-sponsored health benefits. So that means that you have set up a group plan of some sort and you're paying the payments through that group plan. So if you are a single employer, if you were able to establish a group plan, depending on the state, I actually don't know what you can do in Texas, but I think here in DC, like you have to have at least 2 people. But if you're able to create a group plan and you made the payment through the group, then apparently, yes, that counts. If you didn't, then no, because it's not the employee, what the employee paid, it's what the employer contributed into the plan as a benefit. So it's still a little dicey there, what exactly this means. So that's, again, something you just want to be keeping on top of as we get towards that forgiveness to see if there's clarification around that. Same thing with the retirement, by the way, exact same thing. It was employer paid retirement benefits, not if you paid your own into your own IRA, let's say.
Mm-hmm. So I do have another very interesting, very unique question coming in, Manny, and I'm not sure if you can answer this, but because the number of employees has to remain the same, what would you do in the instance of an employee that passed away during the layoff period?
Oh, yeah. First of all, let me clarify something. It's not the employee head count, it's the full-time equivalent head count. So it's not that I had 5 employees. It actually matters how much they worked for you as well. Because if I have 5 employees working 10 hours a week, that's only 1 full-time equivalent employee. So that's the number that you need to meet, is your full-time equivalent. So that's a very important thing. But if someone passed away, so there is a rule that says that, and I'll kind of answer it this way. There's a rule that says that if I laid off my employees and I made a good faith effort to rehire them, but due to circumstances, they could not be rehired, then that requirement is waived. So in this case, I would probably apply the same rule and say that probably applies here, that you essentially have made a good faith effort, if you will, to, want to hire someone, and they couldn't obviously be hired. I would still try to fill that position just to be on the safe side though.
Right.
Now, if you miss it, doesn't mean your entire PPP won't be forgiven, just a portion of it won't be.
Another unique question that we've got coming in is, if a company has employees with visas, how are they going to be affected in terms of the PPP loan?
Another great question that I don't think we have an answer to. In fact, there was an article this morning talking about this very issue of people who have visas, work visas now, they can't work. So what does this mean for our entire, immigration system, I guess. So yeah, I honestly don't know what the answer to that would be. Again, I would kind of go back to that good faith, like, well, I'm trying to keep these people in good faith, and therefore I'm applying for forgiveness based on these circumstances that are beyond my control. I would probably go to that and use that argument. But again, a really good question to keep on top of as we move through the next few weeks here to see if there's further guidance on that.
Yeah, I think, this is a constantly evolving situation, which we've mentioned a couple of times. So as more of these questions come out, I'm sure that we'll be getting more answers and more clarifications from people at the top levels as we start moving into repayments and forgiveness and things like that.
Yeah.
So I have a question coming in about, by when do the funds have to be used after being deposited in the bank? And it's a question that we've gotten quite a bit. Another question similar to that is, people have received their funds at the very end of April. So what is the ending date of the 8-week period? And I think that right now that is still June.
Yeah, that would be, well, it's 8 weeks. So count out 8 weeks or 56 days. It's 56 days is the, so yeah, but the minute that money hits your bank account, so if they direct deposited the money, the day that money hits your bank account, that's the day that you start counting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question about after the 8 weeks being up, and we've gotten this a few times. After the 8 weeks is up, can our employee numbers and payroll numbers decrease if it's before June 30th?
Yes. So yes, you can. Once the period is over, you can decrease everything back. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of weird. You have until June 30th to get everything back to normal, but once your 8 weeks is up, you can decrease everything by then. And yeah, there's no issue with that. So
and then we did have another question coming in about, there's a lot of fluctuation in states that are opening and starting to kind of ease those restrictions. And I know locally we're looking at the potential of businesses possibly having to close again or minimize the staff that they have. So how is that going to impact their PPP loan if they bring them back and then they use all of those funds and then they have to let them go again? Are they going to be able to apply for another PPP loan if those funds are still available?
We'll find out what Congress decides. I know that as of this morning, they're trying to push through a new $3 trillion package. So stay tuned. We'll see. I mean, there's been, through the House this morning, another $3 trillion, although I didn't see any business relief in there. So I think that's more geared towards like healthcare and whatnot. But there is talk of another stimulus package for sure. So, we'll wait and see. Stay tuned. I hope so, but yeah.
So we've got a question coming in asking you to repeat some info that you had provided earlier. Can you use the PPP for diesel purchases if you're a trucking company? And also, if they pay interest on the trucks, could they claim that information as well?
So two, again, gray areas that we're not sure. So the transportation was mentioned as an authorized expenditure. However, it was not clarified what exactly they meant by transportation, quote unquote. So some people have interpreted that to be gasoline in your car, basically. So if you are a trucking company, that's probably considered more of a cost of good or a cost of sale for you. So I don't know if it's going to count. Again, something you want to keep close eye on. The intent was not for it to be used for cost of sales type thing. So I would, based on the principle of kind of what they're trying to do, I don't think it would count for you. But again, we don't have an official answer to that. what was it? Oh, and then interest on the truck. So again, the intent there was interest on debt. It was later kind of further said that what they meant was interest on personal and real property. So I believe a truck counts as personal. I think that's personal property. So in that sense, the interest and the interest alone may be applied. But again, you want to double check because it wasn't really clear what that meant. Mortgage interest was specifically called out. And then interest was just said. And it's like, well, what does interest mean? I don't know. I mean, interest on a lot of things, right? Credit cards, whatever. So.
Right. So we do have another question.
We're making this even more complicated. So.
I do have another question coming in live from Carlos Miranda. So Carlos, I have got you unmuted. So make sure to unmute yourself on your end, and then you can ask your question live if you are still there, or if we've already answered your question. You can just go ahead and lower your hand. Carlos, are you there? Can you hear us?
It's Carlos Maldonado, actually.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry about that. So
No
go ahead
problem.
and ask your question. You are live with Manny right now.
Okay, so it was not so much a question, it was a comment regarding the visas. We do immigration visas and everything. So on the law that was actually put by President Trump, it only applies to visas that are applied in the consulate. So outside of the US, employers can still apply for visas or extensions, what is called an extension of status here in the United States. So a lot of employers are continuing to hiring these people. The reason that I said this is because I know a lot of people are always saying, well, my employee's visa is going to expire in May. What do I do? So you still have the option to extend the state of the immigrant if you do it in the United States with United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. So I just wanted to comment that out because I know it's been something that our firm has been dealing with daily regarding these questions.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I know this is definitely becoming an interesting topic. So, well, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we do have another question coming in live from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I've got you unmuted on our end, so go ahead and ask your question. You are live with Manny.
Hi.
Hey. Oh,
Hey, I didn't really catch. I heard a little, I missed the part of where somebody asked or you mentioned something about, can you pay somebody off like for the 8 weeks, or how does that work?
Can you
like
clarify?
one lump sum instead of going week by week, in other words?
Oh yeah, I guess someone wrote in to say, can I give someone just one lump payment? And so what I'm saying is, I mean, yes, I mean, there's nothing that says you can't just give someone one payment, you know, that's fine, as long as you meet all the other criteria. What I was saying is just be careful, because we've gotten some clients, some people that, not our clients, of course, but that maybe, they kind of held off payroll for the last few weeks because they knew the money was coming, right? So they didn't pay anyone for the last few weeks. And now all of a sudden they want to pay, everyone in one lump sum, right? I want to pay all my back payroll off in one payment, right? And so what I'm saying is just be careful with that. I mean, there's, again, nothing specifically that says you can't do that. But if I was an auditor and I was auditing these, these payments, I would definitely catch that and probably ask, well, what are you doing here? Because it's actually, you also can't, legally, you can't withhold payment from employees either. So
of course,
that's
no.
Tricky areas. So anyway.
Okay. I have another question. So if this loan runs out and we're still, our business, we're in the entertainment business, so we don't know when we can go back. So if the 8 weeks, the PPP loan runs out, the 8 weeks, can our employees return to unemployment?
Yeah. I mean, after the 8 weeks, yeah, if you have to let everyone go after the 8 weeks is done, then yeah, you can do that. And yeah, everyone goes back to, I mean, the idea was that hopefully we wouldn't have to, but
I know. We're just, I think we're going to be like the last ones to actually go back to work full time.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's possible. So yes, unfortunately, you can,
Okay.
do that, yeah.
Okay. Okay, those were my questions. Well, oh, and you answered something on we had one of our employees pass away, and a few weeks ago, and it was, he already had health problems and stuff. He wasn't, we were still paying him because that was the thing to do, but we didn't know if, since having one less employee, is that going to affect us? And obviously we can hire somebody else to replace him, right?
Mhm. Yes, you can. You can hire someone else. And again, I would kind of go back to that, what the SBA was saying was that if you made a good faith effort to rehire and due to other circumstances, they didn't take the position, then you can be forgiven. And so I would use that argument here as
Okay.
well.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, Elizabeth, thank you for your questions. I'm going to go ahead and we've got a couple of questions coming in about owners' payments. And there seems to be some confusion, Manny, about people who have LLCs. Some people were told that they could not actually pay themselves from their PPP. And so we have a question about that. It seems that they actually could cover their compensation as a sole member of an LLC. Is that true? And if it is true, could they apply for a second PPP just to cover their income?
Well, you can apply for a second PPP. So I guess if there was an error in your original application, I mean, we've been able to get an amended application. So maybe that's more what you would do. But yeah, as an LLC, I mean, you are able to cover owner compensation as part of the PPP. So that was included as part of the payroll compensation. So you should be able to do that. Now, if you're a corporation, you are required to pay everything through payroll because there are no, you can't get like an owner distribution or anything like that. So that has to be done through payroll. But for an LLC, I mean, you can pay yourself. Yeah, it's just the profit of the business because you ultimately get taxed on that. Mm-hmm. So it's anything that you get assessed the tax on that you could take as part of the PPP.
So our other question regarding owners is, what if you have multiple owners that are taking some kind of salary from the business?
Yeah, I mean, same thing there. So you would have to look at the total profit, right? So it's all based on the total profit of the business for last year. And then I guess based on everyone's equity share, that's their percentage of it. So you'd have to kind of prorate all that out. So you have to do a little bit of math there to figure out then what you could compensate each employer with. So I would definitely use an accountant to help you figure all that out, because that's a lot of calculation, based on also your operating agreements and things like that.
So we've got some questions coming in about health insurance, disability insurance, and reimbursement to employees for health insurance. Can you go ahead and include those as forgiveness?
What were they? What were the
health insurance, disability insurance, and reimbursement to employees for health insurance?
So you can include the amount that you pay into the plan as your employer contribution for their benefit. So if you're you shouldn't be reimbursing employees for their health benefits. I mean, that's done through an insurance plan. So I don't know what you would be reimbursing there, but that payment you can include.
We are getting some questions about whether or not a recording of this webinar will be available. Yes, it will be available via the El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce's YouTube channel. We'll have it up by tomorrow morning, so you can go ahead and go back. It's a lot of information, I know, so I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to revisit some of the information that you provided. So we've got time for about just 2 more questions. So we do have a question coming in about we already answered that one. So this person specifically has 3 employees. And so to make calculations easy, let's say that they received $20,000 on a PPP loan, and they also received $3,000 on an EIDL loan. So how much of that $23,000 received could be forgiven?
Well, just the PPP portion is forgiven. So I wonder if they mean an advance on the EIDL. because if it's just 3,000, that sounds like it's an advance.
Right.
They had 3 employees, you mentioned?
3 employees, yes.
Yeah, so that, okay, so that was your advance. That was supposed to come out of the 20,000. So you should have gotten 17,000 PPP and then 3,000 at this advance to make it a total of 20,000. That was the original way it was supposed to happen. That's not what happened in real life though. What happened to you is exactly what happened is you got the 20,000, you got the full PPP and then an additional $3,000. So I honestly don't know what they're gonna do about that. What I'm saying is just count that as a $23,000 PPP for right now until we hear otherwise what exactly they want us to do with this. Just consider that you got a $23,000 PPP and go with that. That's what I would say.
All right, next question, a complicated, but I'm sure an issue that is going to occur for a lot of businesses. What if a business needs to fire somebody specifically? due to
Hijo,
their work
will you change my ticket? Are you going to the stop?
but they were, sorry about that. What if someone needs to fire someone due to their work performance, but they were calculated in the loan?
Yeah, so again, the rules say you have to maintain a full-time equivalent, right? So if you had to terminate someone, I'm actually, again, not sure what exactly you would do with that. I would again kind of point back to that good faith effort rule and say, well, maybe you can use that. Although I could say that the argument would also be made that, well, you would probably have to replace that person anyways, because if you're terminating a role, it's not that you're laying off that role and closing that position, it's that you're letting go of the specific person. So you would have to rehire that person. So I would say this, I would say probably for right now, to maintain your same full-time equivalents, you would have to rehire someone into that position by June 30th, let's say. However, you could possibly make the argument that you made a good faith effort there. So that is a possibility, but otherwise I would just rehire someone into that role.
So we do have a question about rehiring somebody into that role. So you wouldn't necessarily have to keep them at the same pay rate because, you know, they're coming into the business, whereas the other person probably had some seniority and was getting paid in regards to that seniority. So you wouldn't necessarily have to pay them the same pay rate because it depends on head count more so than the pay rate, correct? Correct.
Yes. So that's a good point. Yes. Every person doesn't have to be paid the same. And if you're replacing, that person doesn't have to be paid the same. But just make sure, yes, the head count is, or the full-time equivalent count is you're okay there. Also, make sure that your overall payroll spend does not decrease by more than 25% over what you were spending last year, because we have gotten that question a lot. So, oh, I let go of everyone back in, March. Now I'm rehiring everyone, but I'm rehiring everyone at a much lower wage rate. Well, that's great, but if that decreases your overall payroll spend by more than 25% than what you spent last year, you're not going to meet that criteria. So you have to think about that. Okay. Make sure that you're keeping those levels the same. So like I said, there's a couple of pieces there that have to play off each other.
We've got another question coming in about owner compensation. So how much can you pull for owner compensation under draws? You mentioned something about getting the average of the draws and dividing it by 12, then multiplying by 2.5. And that will be the amount that you could pull for owner compensation. Is that correct?
No. So first of all, it's not draws. It's the profit of the business. It's your EBITDA basically. Okay. So it's what shows up on your tax return. It is irrelevant what you draw from the business. What is relevant is the profit of the business. So it's that you divide your profit last year divided by 12 to get your monthly profit. That times 2 is what you can take. So it's not 2.5, it's 2. That's what you can claim for your compensation.
We've got just a couple of more questions that we have time for. So first of all, coming in is a question about QuickBooks. Is tracking expenses using QuickBooks good enough? This person has been writing a lot of checks and they were not able to open a separate account. And so they have money being deposited for work and case filings. So would QuickBooks be good enough to track the expenses to make sure that they have that forgiveness at the end of this?
Oh yes, absolutely. Like we're using QuickBooks, I'm using QuickBooks for myself and obviously all our clients because we don't want to be opening multiple bank accounts. So yeah, QuickBooks is great to track all this for sure.
All right. Final question that we have time for right now is, can the payroll tax deferral be set up retroactively?
Payroll tax for, I think that may depend on your payroll system. Like, I don't think our system will do it retroactively, unfortunately. I suppose it could, but you probably have already paid the Social Security tax, because like in our payroll system, it just takes all the money at once. So you probably already paid the amount over, and getting that money back you're going to be pulling it's like pulling teeth. So probably not, but start it now, I would say.
Great information. Manny, thank you so much for spending so much time with us and all of the members of the chamber, and also, of course, all of the members of the El Paso Bar Association. Really fantastic information. We do have some other questions that have been coming in, but I will gather all of those questions for you, send them to your team, and we will send out answers to those questions as soon as we have them via email, and we'll also make sure to provide them to the El Paso Bar Association so we can publish them on the El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce website, and of course also on the Bar Association website. Sylvia, is there anything that you want to say before we let everybody sign off?
I just want to thank the El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for facilitating this. And Manny, thank you very much for your assistance. It was very practical and useful information. And thank you for taking the time to do it.
Sure.
And everybody stay healthy, stay safe, stay healthy, wash your hands.
Yes, make sure to practice social distancing. Manny, thank you and your team so much for doing this for us. Like I said, you are true experts in this. And I think that you all deserve an honorary PhD and some time sitting on a beach somewhere relaxing after all of this is over.
I'll take that. Yes, that would be very nice.
Well,
just not the beaches up here. They're too cold. So.
Or you know what? You can always spend some time here in Texas drinking some margaritas with us down here.
Like South Padre Island, been there a few times. That seems a lot nicer. So yeah.
There we go. That sounds like a plan. Thank you everybody for joining us today. When Sylvia mentioned making sure to wash your hands and sanitize and stay clean, and we do have another session on keeping it clean and sanitizing and prepping your workplace for customers and employees to start coming back in. That will be tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. featuring Freedom Janitorial Services. So make sure to tune in for that for some tips and tricks to make sure that you have a clean and healthy workplace for your customers and employees. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. We will be publishing a recording come tomorrow morning at the latest, and we will be sending out that YouTube link to all of our participants, and it will be posted across all of our social media channels. So just make sure to stay tuned for that. Thank you all, and we will see you all next time. Thank you, guys.